Frank Lloyd Wright was arguably the sole pioneer of the modern movement in America. The European modern movement was partially a response to the destruction of the First World War, and America didn't face that same set of circumstances. So while Europe was busy rebuilding its dense cities, America was expanding outwards, for better or for worse. And part of what made Frank Lloyd Wright so unique is that he didn't have a traditional architectural education. We didn't have many architecture programs at the time in the United States, and the ones we did have taught a very traditional Beaux Arts inspired style of designing. Frank didn't do that. Instead, he went to the University of Wisconsin for 1 year, where he studied civil engineering, and then after that, he said he knew all he needed to and moved to Chicago, where he worked under Louis Sullivan. Wright's career can really be split up into three parts. The first is his Prairie School of Architecture. The second is the Taliesin Fellowship and his sort of international style. And the later part of his career was defined by the large commissions that he did. This video will just touch on the first part, the Prairie School, as his style really evolved and grew dramatically as he gained more experience. Now, arguably the most important characteristic of the Prairie School of Architecture is its horizontality. Wright was from the Midwest, born and raised in southern Wisconsin, and if there's one thing that the Midwest has, it's acres and acres of flat land. And so Wright's Prairie School of Architecture is responding to this sort of wide, flat landscape by making heavy use of long horizontal lines in the architecture itself. That's not to say he didn't do tall buildings, and some in this style, but the dominant lines in the composition are all horizontal rather than vertical. And now, if you remember the Art Deco video, it's sort of the opposite of that. Art Deco made heavy use of vertical lines to emphasize height, and this sort of horizontal line is doing the opposite. It's emphasizing the sort of width and length of the building. So this can be as simple as literally putting horizontal lines, having sort of like a decorative stone element here that is higher contrast than the other parts of the structure here. So contrast is something you can use without having to make heavy use of different levels of depth. So for example, if we've got this flat stone sort of structure here, we can texture this any way we want. And so there are ways to do it where it comes out more vertical like this, or horizontal like this. And this is more reminiscent of a prairie style sort of building. And so the way we've set it up here, even though it's the exact same structure, the areas of higher contrast sort of run horizontally, and there's no unbroken vertical lines here. They all run from side to side. So compare it to this, where we're putting heavy emphasis on these sort of corners here to show their verticality. Here we're showing like the bands on the different floors, and we're sort of blending the window in with the wall that it runs into. Now, one thing that Wright made heavy use of is grouping windows, and especially in groups of 5 and 7 or odd numbers. Very rarely were there just sole windows sort of plopped into a wall. He liked to put them in sort of sets. And so kind of two ways you can go about it. Obviously the traditional, just cutting a hole in your wall. Or one technique I like to use to get sort of thinner window frames is just to use trapdoors and either, put them back to back or all in one over here. You can sort of create 5 or 7 windows in a very small space without having to have a full block in between them. Another feature that really screams Frank Lloyd Wright and Prairie School are these very broad overhanging eaves. So here we've got 2 blocks on either side of our build here, and these again call attention to the sort of horizontality. We don't have a lot of pitch in this roof. It's very flat and it's sloping out very far over our build. This is sort of a mock-up reminiscent of the Dana House in Springfield, Illinois. And here we've got, this one was a hip roof. Here we've got a gable roof. And again, we've got this very broad eave that sort of hangs off over the side. And even though this is a 2-story structure, all of our lines, again, kind of run horizontally, where like these main high contrast elements all run horizontally, and we've got this broad roof that sort of creates the effect that this is much wider than it would be tall. One other feature I added to this is this sort of retaining wall and the planters that are built in, and Wright made heavy use of these kind of retaining walls and planters to sort of wall off outside sections and kind of combine them into the main structure itself, sort of, again, merging the build with the landscape around it. This right here is an Engle Nook. It's sort of a built-in recess around a like fireplace. So we got our wall here and it's cut out, and there's built-in seating around the fireplace. The hearth is kind of the heart of the home, and so this would be a place to, sit and converse with the family. This kind of brings us to our final example here. I've made a mock-up, made the plan first, and then constructed the full build, but we'll start with this sort of simplified version so you can see kind of the elements more abstractly. And so to start off the plan here, the first thing I put down was the fireplace / chimney. Want to kind of build around this. Obviously, like early 1900s, central heating isn't all that common, very expensive, and so most homes are sort of built around the fireplace as sort of the center of activity. And then we've got this sort of open design here. So on one end, we'll have our living room, the other end, dining room. And open doesn't necessarily mean that like there's no walls. It just kind of means that there's no doors and separation between the two. And this sort of open concept will continue over here into this sort of courtyard, which I'll show you. And again, we've got retaining walls here to sort of wall off exterior portions and meld them into this sort of overall scheme of the house. Now, Wright wasn't big on having a beautiful symmetrical plan. He wrote that architecture sort of comes about by well-organized spaces, and so it's kind of a function first, form second mentality, where the spaces are all where they're supposed to be, and interacting, or the spaces interacting with one another will sort of create a harmony. So if this was like a perfect square and we sort of fit everything in, that might not be as beautiful or harmonious in his eyes as a good flow between the spaces where everything is sort of in its place. All right, and so here is the completed house based on that plan. One thing I'll start off with here is the porte cochere. Now, Wright was designing pretty much at this time at the start or the advent of the automobile, and so a garage was not a common thing to have. Most of the time, you'll just have this sort of built-in sort of overhang to park a car under. And here is sort of like early 1920s car designed. Just kind of a nice historical touch that sort of sets this in the time. One other thing that Wright did a lot, especially in the Prairie style, is sort of hide the front entrance. From the street, he didn't like it if you were able to kind of see the front door. It was always kind of tucked around a corner. And just walking around sort of front porch here, we've got a retaining wall and these sort of pillars and our grouped windows here. I've used trapdoors to create the divisions, so there's sort of 5 spaces that sort of act as our 5 windows here, even though, you can pop right through them. So through our front door, we've got our dining space. Lovely painting, table, everything. Wright was big on having all of the sort of elements tie into the home. If you remember Art Nouveau, the Gesamtkunstwerk, that could be used to describe this too, where everything is sort of designed to fit in with the scheme of the home, even down to, say, like the paintings you put in. And so this is sort of a dual-sided fireplace, and we've got our open concept here where we can walk freely into the living room. Here we've got kind of a more seating area, bookshelf worked into sort of furniture here. We head over into our kitchen. Wright was not a big fan of designing, beautiful kitchens, especially not at this time. He described the kitchen as more of a workroom than a room that you really want to spend that much time in. And at this point, many people still were hiring servants to, cook and clean for them. And so in those cases, the kitchen would be put with like the servants' quarters and everything in a sort of separate wing of the house. The sort of division between like the served spaces where like the family lived and the service spaces where like servants worked and lived was very clear. And many homes had like separate staircases that the servants would take and the family would take. And so it was essentially having like two separate houses that were sort of combined in like the dining room and where the corridors overlapped. But yes, even in a home without servants, like the kitchen was not very well equipped or very big. Often kind of like this narrow, thin galley style. Here we've got our kind of set of doors that open up to this courtyard that also goes into the porte cochere. And this is again trying to meld the architecture with the landscape around it, which is kind of a central tenet of Wright's Prairie School. Here we've got an office space and this sort of bay here with the window. Got a bookshelf in here, and Beehive is a great block for like a sort of desk space or a cabinet. Also pairs really well if you want to put like signs and item frames on it to make it look like it has handles. This kind of looks like a handle too. And the cartography table with the globe is a really nice touch. Then over here we've got, I did not make that bathroom, but we've got bedrooms here. So this would be sort of a kid's bedroom. We've got one window here that kind of overlooks this small courtyard. Here we've got our master bedroom, family photo, large windows with banners acting as sort of blinds, and our big bed here, the master bathroom there. And then this would be sort of a secondary bathroom. We've got a cherry tree. Wright was actually kind of a weeb. He really loved Japan. Sometimes when he couldn't pay his like draftsmen, he'd pay them in Japanese prints, which were kind of useless at the time because Wright was the only one that cared about him. But you notice a lot in his later work the sort of Japanese influences. And that'll do it for the interior. Again, we've got another planter here, sort of worked in with the stonework. That's a nice touch to sort of tie it all together. And again, yeah, chimney, sort of the central element. We've got our broad roof here, overhanging. This sort of interior-exterior porch thing makes the roof appear even broader, sort of tying in this with the central part of the house itself. So there you have it. That'll just about do it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, be sure to drop a like. And if you want to see more architecture content in the future, be sure to subscribe. School's going to start up pretty shortly. And so in addition to the Minecraft content, there's definitely going to be some architecture school stuff in there. So if you're looking forward to that, that'll be coming out soon. And that'll just about do it. If you have any suggestions on what I should do next, be sure to drop them in the comments. And I'll see you next time, guys.